Okay, folks, you are looking at a 1995 Pontiac Grand Prix, which is presently in my garage. The car is owned and operated by my sister-in-law, who tells me that she has many instances where she attempts to start this vehicle and finds that it plays possum. In other words, there is no turning of the starting motor. The car will not start. The lights come on. In other words, it's not responding to the key that's in the ignition. Anyhow, we're going to look at part of that and explore how to cure this problem in this older car. I am now sitting in the driver's seat of this Pontiac, and will show you the starting situation with this car. Incidentally, this car has a ignition key that, hopefully you can see that, has what's called a chip on it. This is a common thing with the GM cars going back so many years. This chip is actually a resistor. For those of you that know a little bit about electronics, it's simply, that's all it is a resistor that you would find in pretty much anything that's been made electronically, radios, TV sets, anything from the past 50 or more years. Anyhow, typically when you turn the ignition switch to the on or start position, this light that you see at the top of that dash area, called the security light, will come on and it should go off. If it doesn't go off and it stays lit or it flashes, you typically will not be able to start the car for at least 3 minutes, and it will kill the starting system and also the fuel system. That has been a chronic problem with this car. It's not happening at the moment, but I've determined that that's what I need to correct in order for this car to operate without a problem. And that's what we're going to address here. Okay, folks, the first thing I did after I explained to you how you start the car and what you see on the dash is I went to the vehicle manual that comes with the car, and hopefully what you're looking at that's focused is page section 2, page 11, and it says that this car has what's called the passkey 2 system. It goes on to explain how this works, pretty much what I've already said, that the key contains this resistor chip in it that I just showed you a few minutes ago, and I'm showing you now. That's on the ignition key, and will tell you that if the car doesn't start, that you would have to wait 3 minutes for it to retry it. And that's kind of what the complaint that I have from the owner of the car is telling me, that she attempts to start the car and it will not start, and she has to wait a period of time, which amounts to what she says, about 3 minutes. Some of these GM cars, I hear that the time is actually longer. It could even be 10 minutes, but effectively when you turn the key to the start position and this system locks you up, it almost seems like if there's no battery in the car, it just doesn't do anything. Although the telltale sign of this system being involved is that you will get lights, the dash lights come on, everything seems to work from the standpoint of lights, but you just don't get anything. So, having looked in the manual that comes with this car for identification, I am now prepared to move on to the next step. This setup, passkey 2, is one set of systems that GM used on various cars. This would be an older one. But thanks to another YouTube viewer, I was able to get information on this car that will help me do this work. Anyway, this is also called the Vats system, and that's Vehicle Antitheft System, spelled with a V as in victory, and that's effectively what this is too. So, the first step to looking at bypassing this system is to remove the panel under the dash that is right directly in front of the brake pedal. Okay, we're under the dash in this car, and operating a camera in a confined space and trying to look at parts is going to be very difficult, and I'm not even sure whether this thing will focus well. That's something that I can't tell right now. But anyhow, in trying to show you where the steering column is, it's a tube that's directly above the camera right now. Let me see if I can focus this thing in here. Anyway, I think in the picture you can see that there's a brass tube right here. It looks brassy anyway. I doubt that it's brass. It's steel. But and I've got my screwdriver on it. This is the steering column, and if you follow that back, and this is where taking a picture gets difficult, there's a set of wires going in at the bottom down here. And of these wires, there is a wire right here that I've got wrapped in my finger that I've identified as the wire that I was talking about. I've got my fingers on it. It's an orange colored tube right here. It definitely goes into the steering column, and when it emerges out here, and I hope I'm showing you this with the camera, there's two white wires inside that wire. They're very thin wires. They're very narrow and small gauge that come out of there. I'm going to disconnect those and show you more in a minute. Anyway, that's directly underneath the steering column. They're not hard to find. Actually, I expected it to be worse than this. The problem is you want to be really careful what wires you play with under this dash in this area of the steering column, because there's wiring going to the airbag, as I said before, and I think if you were to tangle with the wrong wires, you could possibly set off the airbag. You wouldn't like that experience. Anyway, I'm going to go ahead and tamper with these white wires, and I'll show you more in a second. Alright folks, I was trying to disconnect the wiring that I just spoke about. It is an orange jacket. It's got two wires that are white in there. They are pretty much hair thin, so it really requires very careful handling. If you were to jerk around these things and not reinstall it correctly, you probably could cut off the Vats passkey system, which then of course you would have a disabled car. The joke is this is actually connected with a connector to over here, so it made it pretty easy to disconnect. It takes work. You have to have a tiny screwdriver to get the clip to release, and that's typical in wiring anymore. But what I wanted to do was establish without a doubt that this is the Vats passkey wiring. These are the two wires that make a circuit to the key resistor that sends the resistance back to the computer, telling it to either allow or not to allow the car to start. Since I have disconnected this at a connector, this will now resolve the issue as to whether this is in fact the wires. I have already tried it, but I'm going to show you now what happens when you try to start the car and these wires are disconnected or the key doesn't work. You put the key in the ignition, and the first thing you're going to notice is the security light is flashing. When that light is flashing, this car isn't going to start. And that's really what you get right there. I'm turning the key to start and there's nothing. The lights are on, and every time I try to start the car, the headlights blink on and off. This would quickly run down your battery in cold weather, and that's kind of what's happened with this car. So this would be a real nuisance if you're out on the road somewhere and you run into this problem. And some of you may not be able to start your car, and this is what's happened some of the time here without waiting for a period of time. Very, very inconvenient. Anyway, at this stage we have identified the Vats passkey wiring, and now what the cure is we have to take this key and measure the resistance on that resistor. There are, as I'm told, there are about 15 different codes or resistance settings. And once we've established what that resistance is, we can buy resistors and effectively send a complete circuit back to the computer with a permanent resistor circuit, and that would really eliminate this key chip thing completely. Okay, we're testing for the resistance on the key, which I have mounted into a vise behind this Radio Shack ohm meter. In order to get the reading, you have to literally put the contacts across the probes across the key chip on both sides. I kind of taped this meter up here so I could show you what we get for a reading on the camera. It's a little bit awkward, but I think I've got it set up here. And the reading on this key comes to about 885, 884 ohms, and that is within one of the settings for this key system. This is a 5-pack of resistors, 220 ohms, in order to match the range of the key for the Pontiac. I will need to solder 4 of these resistors in series to bring us to a range of 880 ohms. So that's what I'm going to do next, and that will be the way to make a key for this automobile that will work actually as a bypass for the security system. I have now mounted the resistors in series, 4 of them, to solder these, which I will do with my soldering gun, and prepare this for installation. Okay folks, in front of you you're looking at the wiring diagram for the setup on the passkey Vats system. This here is the ignition switch, of course this being the key with the chip or the resistor, and this being that wiring that reads the key and the computer end of it that picks up the coding. So effectively what we're going to do to bypass this setup here is we're going to cut these wires, effectively creating that situation, and then we're going to take the resistors that we have put together and put those as a bypass, like I'm doing here, to this system. If you'll notice, what the outcome is this part of the system is then cut off because the key wiring doesn't have any function once you bypass it with the resistors. This is to kind of give you an idea of what exactly you're going to do with the wiring once you place the resistors in the circuit. And this is how the finished part will look actually. Alright folks, we're back underneath the dash of the Pontiac Grand Prix. In my hand I'm showing you the 2 wires that go to the steering ignition for the passkey. These 2 wires are only functional to read the passkey code or the resistance in the resistor that I explained before. I've already shown you these wires. What's interesting is that they come together at a junction, which is part of this here. This part goes back to the computer. So I was able to just make a normal disconnection of these 2 wires. The wires I'm holding right now, effectively, I'm just going to leave them up under the dash. To me, they're no longer going to be important to me. The wires I'm holding now, I'm going to cut this clip off, and I'm going to solder my resistor bypass into these 2 wires here, because that would be what I need to do. This is what goes back to the computer to read the passkey. So that's my next step. In fact, if the wires remain in position, I'm going to actually show you cutting them probably at a safe location where if something went wrong I could reconnect these. They're color coded. One is purple and one is white in this particular bundle, and by cutting those I'll always have a reference to go back to the old system if this plan of mine fails. So right now I'm going to cut those wires. And now I have my working 2 wires to make the bypass, and we'll go from there. Alright folks, I decided to go the extra mile here and use a couple of alligator clips to, let's say, test this setup before I went ahead and made it permanent. Obviously, if this wasn't going to work, I'd have to put the old system back together. So anyway, I've now done this. I put a temporary setup here, and we'll go ahead and see if in fact we have a go. The key is on start. The security light has gone off, and the engine wants to start. So I know right now that we have succeeded in bypassing this system. I'm going to make this connection permanent. Okay folks, this is the finished work. I just finished soldering this end over here. The rest of this I have placed shrink wrap, or it's shrink tubing on here that I have to still shrink up to seal everything and tape this open area. And this is the end of this job. I have tested it. It works. Okay folks, after shrinking the shrink wrap and tubing and in placing some appropriate wiring tape, this is the finished job. I probably don't want to crimp this wiring any more than it is now as far as a circle of wiring. I will just tuck it up under the dash and this job is done. Once again, in checking the ignition, I've turned it to start. We get the security light. The security light goes off. And the car starts. Battery's a little weak, but that's probably partly attributed to this problem that this gal had. Anyway, that's the end of this story, and I'm going to button this up and call it a day. This is a little postscript here about the key and such that I should have mentioned. Each key code, and there's 15 of them I believe, has a range of ohms. The situation in my case was that the key was about 885 ohms, and the acceptable range to operate the system would have been something close to 790 up to possibly 950. I'm not sure. I got that information from another user. So by using 880 ohms from the 4 resistors from this Radio Shack pack, I was able to make that work. Incidentally, this package of resistors that I bought was only $2, and effectively that's really the whole cost for parts on this job was about $2 to do this.